Hi, everyone. It's Linda Lukovic, and welcome to Healthier You After 40. I'm here with Dr. Heather Hammerstedt. And Dr. Heather is an emergency medicine physician with a specialized board certification in lifestyle medicine, as well as additional certifications and trainings in integrative nutrition, health coaching, medical acupuncture, Ayurveda, public and global health. I don't know how you find the time for all of this, Heather, but that's an incredible background. We are super happy to have you to talk with at the summit. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm an emergency physician. I've been practicing for, I don't know, 18 years or something like that at this point. To talk about, aging ourselves over 40 here.
Yeah, totally.
And I love emergency medicine. It's really an opportunity to make an impact on somebody, like right at the moment they really need you, whether it's for an actual emergency or a perceived emergency.
Mhm.
I really love it. But what I did kind of realize, even when I was in medical school, was that, our medical system has not done a good job of educating professionals on prevention and around movement and mindfulness and the use of food as medicine, really. And
Yeah.
so when I was still in medical school, I actually went and got my health coaching certificate at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And for a long time, I didn't use it that much except to educate my patients in the emergency department.
Okay.
But when lifestyle medicine became a thing, and an opportunity for physicians and other practitioners to board certify in lifestyle medicine, I
Okay.
realized that my kind of full circle was coming around where I had the
Mhm.
opportunity to use the knowledge that I had, and then I've grown throughout all my different opportunities of learning to really make an impact in a different way. And instead of waiting for someone to come in with their chest pain at 3 in the morning,
Yeah. Yeah.
try to get to them, 10, 15 years earlier. And what I think is really, powerful about lifestyle medicine is, really using the evidence behind food and sleep and exercise and mindfulness really for that prevention and reversal of disease, and
Mhm.
using, data to really support that and to
Yeah.
help people get to whatever mind and body goals that they are. I don't set those goals for you. We just
Yeah.
try to help you get to where you want to go in the most sustainable possible way. And that's what we do here at Holist. Holist is sort of a play on words a little bit, like a hospitalist or a gastroenterologist is really using that term to demonstrate that it's really important that we concentrate on all the pillars of health to get people holistically and whole on their own.
Yeah. That's so great. Such an incredible, like diverse, amazing background you have. Yeah, you see it
Thank you.
all. That's great. Yeah. Um, so actually, I didn't tell everyone, but we're going to talk about intermittent fasting mostly. I'm sure we'll dive into some other areas, but obviously a really important topic. What made you decide on that actually, out of everything? Is that something you specialize on in your clinic?
Yeah, so we are all virtual. We do virtual coaching. We don't have a brick and mortar clinic, but I
Okay.
do think that intermittent fasting is a really powerful, one of a lot of very powerful tools that we can use in order to kind of balance our hormones of digestion in order to get to a
Mm.
healthy weight,
Mhm.
or to maintain a healthy weight. And I think it's important for more than just weight, but really just kind of improving, insulin balance and hunger hormones and all of that. And
Mhm.
so it's not for everyone. If
Right.
you've had disordered eating in the past, some people just can't do
Yeah.
intermittent fasting. But a lot of people, while they're afraid of it when we first bring it up,
Mhm.
really can find within just a couple of weeks that they're feeling so much better, and
Right.
separating, food as buffering from food as fuel, I
Yes.
think is helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true. Yeah.
And I am a doctor, and so I do get a little nerdy here. And so I do have some graphs and everything
Yeah.
that I want to share. I'm a pretty visual person, and
Yeah.
so I think that a lot of people would be able to understand this a little bit more rather than me just talking, but me
Yeah.
kind of showing it.
I think it'll be great. A couple of other speakers have kind of mentioned blood glucose balance, but I think, yeah, people don't really, until you kind of see it, I think that'll help a
Yeah.
ton. So, yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's great.
And more so than blood glucose, it's really that the hormone in insulin that this really affects. And so
Yeah.
if
Mhm.
you're listening here and you're still listening to us, then you probably kind of fall into one of three categories on intermittent fasting. Like you've never heard of it, or that sounds like a terrible idea, or I'm all in.
Yeah.
So I
Great.
thought today we'd do some work on a few things so I can pull everybody into the same category.
Perfect.
So first we're going to talk about what intermittent fasting is, then we're going to talk about what it's doing physiologically, and then we're going to talk about some myths and some strategy. So how does that sound?
Perfect.
And Linda, you just break in and ask me
Yeah.
any questions you want along the way.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
so what is intermittent fasting? So intermittent fasting is an eating pattern where you cycle between periods of eating and not eating. So it doesn't say anything about which foods to eat, but rather when you should eat them. So fasting is basically like a voluntary abstinence from food for any reasons, and it can be done and is done safely for any time from a few hours to a few months with different methods. And it's supposed to be sort of like part of your daily life, right? So like breakfast is breaking your fast from overnight, right? So healers in spiritual history, Greeks in medical history, intellects in philosophical history, some religious history, they've all done this for ages. And so it's not new. Chinese and Indian traditions also include this in their healing systems. Hippocrates from 400 BC also stated to eat when you are sick is to feed your illness. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of, people have been using this for long-term health. Some people use it as a weight management tool. Some people use it for religious or spiritual purposes. Some people use it for athletic endurance, and some just because they feel better when they're doing
Yeah.
it. So there are a lot of different intermittent fasting methods, and we will get to some of that after I get into some of the science a little bit. I'm just saying all this to say it's not dangerous, as well as it's done thoughtfully and with good
Yeah.
planning and with the right food. So no food at all is allowed during a fasting period. You can drink water, coffee, or tea, or other non-caloric beverages. I guess what I want to talk about is what happens when you fast. So let me back up. I guess at first, what happens when you eat? So glucose and fat are like what your body uses for energy and what it stores away when it thinks you don't need it but might need it later. So today we're going to concentrate mostly on glucose because it's the simplest. So glucose is like a little blood sugar unit that's released from complex and simple carbohydrates,
Mm-hmm.
and the hormone insulin lets you use the glucose by putting it into your like metabolic making energy pathways. Or if you don't need it right then, insulin helps you store it in your fat cells and into your liver to access and use later. So what you eat changes how much glucose spikes and how much the responding insulin storage hormone spikes. Does that make sense?
Yep. Total sense. Actually, I have a question for you because I know everyone else is going to ask this, so I'm going to ask it for them.
Yeah.
Um, the coffee thing. So
Yeah.
if you're fasting, so it's absence of food and most liquids, but with coffee, what can you put in it? Does it have to be black?
So like I always say this to my clients is that, like, it is a bit of an experiment for everybody. Some people can use a full fat like addition to the coffee, like a whole like a whipping cream or something like that to keep you full longer.
Okay.
Some people find that that is too much for them and they can really only go tea or black coffee, and
Mm-hmm.
it's we're all a little different, so it's like a little bit of an experiment with
Yeah.
yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I imagine based on your digestion, some
Yeah.
people don't
But
digest.
if you're going to be using something, like, you're going to want to use more fat because it's not releasing glucose, and fat doesn't affect insulin at all.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's not bad. Okay. Can you see this?
Yep. It looks great.
Okay, perfect. So here is a graph of like what insulin does with carbohydrates, protein, and fat, like we were just talking about. So changing what you eat is part of the solution to a hormonal dysregulation that leads to obesity and chronic disease, but it's not really the whole story. It's like the persistent elevation of the glucose and the insulin because of nonstop eating.
Mhm.
And that's another problem. So you can see here, like, say I'm eating breakfast and then a snack in the middle and then lunch and then a snack, you can see that insulin is constantly being stimulated,
Mhm.
and it's constantly going to be storing more of that glucose away because you don't need it at that moment because you already have enough. And so that insulin is like storing it in your fat cells,
Yeah.
and your fat cells are just getting like bigger and bigger, sort of, so to speak. Whereas if you're giving yourself the opportunity to fast even just in between meals, you can see on the bottom here of what that does is it gives your insulin a break and
Mhm.
lets your body just use the glucose that you already have instead of storing it away. Does that make sense?
Does. What do you think of those glucose monitors?
I think that they can be helpful for some people. I think what would be more interesting would be if we could measure insulin in a more robust way,
Right.
because the glucose really only tells you a moment in time.
Hmm.
Whereas what the problem is becoming resistant to insulin doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
So like I know a lot of people talk about like the like a like a glucose index sort of for eating, which I think is simplifying it a little bit too much. When I think what we really need to be doing is thinking about what the food does to our insulin and not necessarily to the glucose, because
Right.
those glucose indexes can be a little
Hmm.
confusing because it's not taking into effect all the other foods that are going along with that food, or the amount of fat or the amount of protein that's going to change the way that you metabolize that glucose.
Right.
Um, so what happens when you fast in a situation where you haven't just eaten and so glucose is not readily available from eating, like as a free glucose, then your body can go to your liver and your fat cells and break down storage there and create the substrates for the energy there, basically like creating new glucose.
Hmm.
And so the problem is that most of our bodies have essentially like forgotten how to do this because we feed it all the time, right? So
Hmm.
we always have like enough glucose floating around to use for our energy pathways, and our insulin is then constantly like storing the rest into our fat and our liver, and our body never has to go back to the liver and fat to break it down and get glucose. So you're essentially relying on glucose, which is simplified a sugar from carbohydrates, for energy instead of relying on your body's ability to burn fat to get energy. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, so interesting. I remember seeing something not too long ago about the percentage of kids now being diagnosed with like fatty liver.
Yes, I see it
And
all the
that's
time.
super scary. Oh, you do
Yeah,
it. Oh,
yeah,
yeah, that's super
yeah.
scary. That's
and the,
not surprising.
and
You just have to
and
walk
again,
in.
like I'm not here to talk about fat today, but like
Yeah,
you're not getting a fatty liver because you're eating too much fat. You're getting that
right.
because you're eating too much, probably simple processed carbohydrates, breaks down that glucose super fast, and your insulin's like, oh my god, like what am I supposed to do with all this, and it
Yeah,
shoves it away, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Right. So can you see this one,
yep.
metabolism and digestion? So um, let's think about this. So here on the far left, where that glucose is, when you feed insulin, sorry, the glucose goes up, and so your insulin goes up. Your body takes up glucose directly for energy and stores the excess in the liver and the fat. And there's reasons why I'm saying this over and over and over again, is so that
That's important.
repetition kind of gets it in your brain a little bit better.
Yeah.
Your post-absorptive state, so 6 to 24 hours after fasting starts, the insulin falls, the liver goes to work, glycogen breaks down to release glucose until it runs out. Then you have gluconeogenesis and ketosis, which is the liver making new glucose from amino acids and glycerol from fat. So the glucose in the blood stays the same even if you're not eating, and providing it with new external glucose. And
Hmm.
then triglyceride fat storage kind of breaks into glycerol and 3 fatty acid change. And the fatty acids are used for the body by energy, and the glycerol for new glucose. And the fatty acids can be used by tissues in the body but not in the brain, and so fatty acids make ketones to cross over to give brain energy.
Mm.
So protein conservation still occurs even if you've been fasting. Some people fast for days because you have an increased level of growth hormone during the fasting that
Hmm.
helps maintain muscle mass and lean tissues. So while your basal energy is met like entirely by the use of ketones and free fatty acids, your adrenaline goes up, and so it prevents you from having a decreased like metabolic state. So what I'm trying to say is we're well adapted to go without food. So
Right.
our bodies need energy. We switch to from burning short-term glucose to burning like longer term fat.
Mhm.
Your body, it's harder to do that, right? And so your body, if it doesn't remember how to do it, like won't do it. You need to remind it.
Yes.
So most weight loss strategies will address the insulin secretion portion of the obesity problem by addressing like what the foods are you're eating. So the
Okay.
spikes of glucose and insulin and how those high those spikes are, I'll show that to
Yeah.
you here in a second.
Okay.
But it's not going to address insulin resistance,
Right.
which is the problem of insulin persistence.
Mm.
How long is your insulin elevated in your body?
Mhm.
The fact that you're so it's a persistence problem. The
Okay.
fact that if you're constantly eating, your insulin is constantly stimulated and
Right.
constantly storing more in fat. So you
Mm.
may lose weight by just doing the what I'm
Yeah.
eating strategy, right?
Okay.
But if your insulin levels remain high, then your weight set point remains high because you're
Mhm.
still storing all of it in your fat instead of breaking it down. So
Right.
intermittent fasting, even for as short of a time as 24 hours once a week, does decrease your body's insulin resistance since it addresses both the levels with what you eat and the persistence of the presence of insulin by when you eat. So this is
Mhm.
what I think is a missing piece, and that I think that this can be a really good tool. So this is an example of eating whatever you want to eat on this one, but with
Okay.
intermittent fasting. So you can see you have, again, and this is just me drawing something out, so it's probably not like entirely accurate, but
Okay.
say you're eating 3 meals and no snacks here on the normal day, and on a fast day, maybe you fast from dinner to dinner. And then you have another sleep, and then you have another day. You can see how you're giving those insulin the opportunity to kind of decrease in your body.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not a proponent of any specific type of eating. As a lifestyle medicine physician, would like everyone to be more plant-based. Does that mean you have to be vegan or vegetarian? No, but I do think it's important that we're talking about not necessarily like low carbohydrates, but low processed carbohydrates
Mhm.
as an opportunity to change the height of this spike of the insulin when you do eat. So here's an example of intermittent fasting with, again, not necessarily low carb, but low processed carbohydrates
Okay. Okay.
and a healthy fat. So the fat is going to help decrease the amount of absorption of that you have with the glucose spikes. So here, if you're imagining, you can see how these insulin spikes are just a lot lower when
Mhm.
you're eating complex, unprocessed carbohydrates. When I'm talking about plants and whole grains and legumes and all that kind of stuff with a healthy fat.
Right.
So this is what you're putting in decreases the spike of that insulin, and then you're also using the tool of giving your body a break and being
Mhm.
able to break down its own storage for that energy.
Great.
Um, so let's see, is that the only one? I think I have one more I want to show.
What would you say to someone, like if someone has hypoglycemia or they believe they have hypoglycemia?
That was a very good adaptation. Most people do not have hypoglycemia. If your body is functioning normally and it knows how to go get its own energy, it's not going to happen. Now, if you're an alcoholic or there's other, reasons that go into that you're not able to metabolize things appropriately, then that's a different story. But I think it's pretty darn rare. And I think that the sensations that people have associated with hypoglycemia are usually probably something else that they're misinterpreting.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Um, I think that people who might have symptoms that are hypoglycemic like
Yeah.
are probably not eating the right amount of fat and protein and
Yeah.
fiber. And they're
So,
reacting to simple carbohydrates. And yeah,
totally.
it's a result of that. So
So I think it's probably this section right here around this hour 3 when the glucose is starting to go down that you're
yeah.
having the opportunity for your body to adjust and shift
Yeah.
itself into a new process. And I think that's a lot of the time what people are misinterpreting is that sensation of your body shifting to get energy from a different place.
Mhm.
And that shift, I think people who have a lot of, when they first start fasting and they start getting like, they start realizing that like every time at hour 16, they
Yeah.
feel this like, craving or like something like that. And I think it's during these kind of pockets right
Right.
here,
Okay.
at 3 and 15 hours where it's shifting.
Right.
That's
So
my
what do you recommend for people when they get into those those areas where they just feel like they can't go longer? Any tips or strategies for people?
so I think one thing that I did not bring up in this is this and we can talk about it, but I often, so we talked about what and we talked about why. Sorry, we talked about what we're eating, we're talking about when we're eating, but we're not talking about why.
Mhm.
And that could be like an entire other lecture
Oh, yeah,
about
totally.
managing our thoughts. But I
Yeah.
think that if you understand what your body is doing and you realize that you're not going to die if you don't eat at
Yeah.
that moment, and you're analyzing a little bit about why I feel like you need to eat right now, and
Yeah.
like managing your thoughts around that, it becomes much easier to just like sit presently in the moment with what that
Mhm.
feeling like. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about education like this, is because if I just tell you when not to eat,
Yeah.
it's just going to be like another diet, right? But if you're like fully understanding that like, this is like using your body
Yeah.
in a way to utilize this
Yeah.
graph, to understand that, then you can get through those periods a little bit differently.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Really understanding the why. It's
Yeah.
important. Mhm.
Okay, so let's get back a little bit to intermittent fasting. So the main confusion that people have is like, can someone explain why this doesn't cause like starvation mode or like holding on to weight like we used to talk about with
Mhm.
skipping meals?
Yeah.
So calories are like, they're not the same as what our bodies do with the form of what we take in. So like you can eat a ton more calories than you take in and you're going to gain weight, but the purpose of the saying like calories in doesn't equal calories out is to make people realize like how much more complicated this is. Because if you
Mm.
think about like calories are like just a measure of like some old white men in lab coats like burning stuff, burning food. It's not necessarily like how our bodies eat. So the more you eat, the more you rev up like your basal metabolic rate. Like it's like a
Mhm.
thermostat or a fire. So
Yeah.
likewise, it's going to go down when you eat less, which is why
Right.
you feel like cold, tired, hangry, right? And
Yeah.
that's why you're eating like cookies after working so hard on staying on point. Um, but weight is a feedback mechanism of work energy balance. So your body is like way smarter than you, and it's trying to decide how much fuel it can count on you to bring in or
Mhm.
what it has to store as potential energy so you like don't die, right? So
Yeah.
calorie recognition or calorie restriction doesn't work because the body will just rev down its basal rate and wait you out or force you to eat to make up for it. So
Understood.
this is different. Often you're not calorie restricting, you're just bringing in calories that you might take in over a whole day in the
Mhm.
space of a couple meals in a smaller window, right? So
Yeah.
true like intermittent fasting isn't about like what you're eating. Of course, like essential to combine it, with unprocessed food and healthy fat and moderate protein for the best efficient results, but it's about mitigating the hormonal effects of eating. So if you're still revving the fire, but just
Yeah.
in smaller time periods, while you will drop your BMR if you restrict for a really long time, we've evolved to be able to do these short-term fasts. So there wasn't like fast, convenient food when we were growing and hunting it, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So if you keep in mind that if you're doing longer fasts, your body also adjusts to having nothing in a totally different way than in then eating just enough. So you can actually rev your metabolic rate up during fasting because your body is having to do the work to break down glycogen and fat.
Okay.
And think of your body like feeding your body. So you're going to burn fat before muscles. You're not going to burn muscle. You're not going to like break down your muscles until you're below 4% body fat. And I don't think any of us have to worry about that.
No, I don't think so.
And why would you store fat if you could just use the protein easier, right? So your growth hormone goes up, like we talked. You're not going to drop your blood sugar. You might sleep better because insulin causes cortisol changes. You're probably going to think clearer because you're using ketones for your brain, and
Mhm.
you won't lose micronutrients because your body will adjust to keep it in. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Is there anyone who shouldn't try intermittent fasting?
um, I think if you had disordered eating, specifically
Mhm.
around bulimia or anorexia, then it's probably going to be very hard for you to do this in a healthy way
Mhm.
unless you work on the thoughts and the why before. So if
Yeah.
you do the education on this, you work with a counselor or a therapist about why it is that you have that body image, why it is that you had that disordered eating, then you could try it, I think. But even more important, to have like a very skilled coach or nutritionist to help you
Yeah.
work through that and be able to recognize when you may not be using this tool in the best way for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about schedules and then some strategy, okay? So, where am I here? So, here are some example. So this is often how people start naturally eating when you start eating the way that we talk about here
Mhm.
at Holist, which is whole real foods, less processed sugar, moderate protein, healthy fats. We just aren't as hungry because protein and fat keep you full longer and
Right.
help you mitigate kind of the breakdown of those complex carbohydrates and that sugar release, which means you're also again spiking your insulin less. So you can extend your fast to 16 hours pretty easily and then get your daily foods into a shorter period of that 8 hours, right? So again, it's not calorie restriction. You're still trying to eat enough. We're
Yeah.
just giving you, like, I like to call it an insulin vacation of when to eat on top of the what to eat insulin spike mitigation that I showed you in those other things.
Okay.
So you can do this every day because you're not calorie restricting. You're just eating in a shorter eating window, so your body should not be increasing your energy expenditure. The more frequently you can do this, more of a reset of your weight set point you're likely to see. But even if you're doing it every other day or just on days when you work or some other pattern, will probably bring you some added success. If we can call this like a 16 and 8 kind of fast plan. If you do it intermittently, it's like an intermittent fasting plan. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah.
Um, Here you can see this is intermittent fasting sort of at its most fundamental. This is a 24-hour fast. Some people call it eat, stop, eat method.
Mhm.
You'll have a complete vacation for eating for 24 hours. It does not really matter what your 24-hour window is. Some people find it easiest to do dinner to dinner, and metabolically, I think this probably makes the most sense as well, especially if you have a family and you want to be eating with them, right, at the end of the day. So
Mhm.
again, this is not necessarily calorie restriction. You're still going to be taking in it's expected for the majority days of the week. So if you're thinking about the calories over an entire week, you may have cut it down on that day to 25 to 35% of expected, but your body doesn't really have a chance to react and decrease your energy expenditure because it's only intermittently down, um,
Mhm.
because every other day you're going to be having normal days. So it's much easier to do than you think it is, especially when you get sort of what we call fat adapted, which is like your body remembering how to go get the energy out of fat. And it's going to do that
Okay.
more and more efficiently the more that you practice with this.
Right.
And if you can be consistent with that, you will be more successful in kind of setting that down. If you do better with meals in the midday, do lunch to lunch. Obviously, you can swap the days of the week.
Mhm.
Um, and when a 24-hour fast is done twice a week, it's sometimes known as like a 5 to 2 diet. Does that make sense?
5 to 2. Yeah.
Yeah,
So the
cool.
broth you're saying is it's like a clean bone broth sort of thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Um, the broth most of the time it's mostly fat and nutrients, and so
Right.
again, fat's not going to really spike your insulin because that it doesn't react to fat, and it will keep you full longer. Some people don't need it, some people do. Everybody's a little
Mhm.
different.
Yeah. Okay. That's great.
um, cool. So some strategies, how's that sound?
Okay.
um, so I think number one is just realizing that obesity is a symptom of hormonal dysregulation and inflammatory cascades. So just like diabetes and cardiovascular disease and cancer and all of our other like metabolic preventable disease, it means it's not just what you eat. So what I'm trying to do with all this education and nerdiness is to make you realize that like this obesity, while you may be healthy now with a higher weight, is a symptom of something that you did not cause yourself, right? Like you did not do anything wrong. This is a hormonal dysregulation and inflammatory problem. And so you have tools from learning here and from processing the why you're eating, the when you're eating, and the what you're eating to adjust that and to regulate those hormones in a way. I think it's important for people to understand that it's not a willpower problem. This is like we have tools to fix this. I like to say it's not willpower, it's skill power.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. Yeah, it's so true.
I think number two is that you need to have a system first strategy, like a coach or an accountability group or a nutritionist. So you're not just like winging it. So the mistake is to like do a little reading and think you know what you're doing, and then you end up just not eating, which is not the thoughtfulness of intermittent fasting with the what and the when that works for you with the right macronutrients, the right schedule, and the right amount of calories to keep your body like chugging along efficiently. And so I think planning that thoughtfully, like if you came into the Holist program, weight wellness program, we would never start you fasting on the first week. We're going to plan, we're going to work on planning, we're going to work on thoughts, we're going to work on taking little vacations in between meals and unprocessing our food. And eventually we would get to this. Because again, like otherwise, like, you know, when some people say they're vegetarians, but they just like eat chips and drink beer. It's like so just because you say you're doing something does not mean you're doing it in the right way.
Yeah, carbitarian, aka.
Yeah, totally. I think it's also really important that you realize that all diets fail. So don't make this a diet. So while people may be using this for weight management, what we're really trying to do is maybe lose weight, but more importantly, let our body do what it's supposed to be doing and let it remember how to do that. And realize that this is going to be a lifestyle change. It's not going to be something you do for 30 days and then all of a sudden, like, you know, everything's fixed. Like, all
so
diets
basically
fail, so
you're
don't
making
make
a decision to incorporate into your life. It's going to be a habit, whether you do it like once a week or 3 times a week, and you're just going to do it forever kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. And that's again, and I say this over and over again, but you need to do your why and your what before you do the when, right? So you're not just like hopping right into this, and understanding your why of why you want to do this. Without internal validation and internal motivation, you can't have like the self-efficacy to move forward and stick with something. So this is how you control your thoughts, which lead to your feelings, which lead to action or inaction. And this is how you recognize and sit with cravings, recognize and sit with emotional eating, and sticking with a lifestyle change. You know, I can tell you all the time what exactly to do, but if you're not internally motivated by something big, not just like the number on the scale, because that's not going to keep anyone doing anything. You need to realize about lifestyle change. That's what we talk about, lifestyle medicine, right? And to not end up as one of the like 95% who loses it all and gains it back +5 in a year, right? So I'm going to contradict myself a little bit. I said all diets fail, but in fact, all diets can work if you adhere to them forever.
That's true, but that's the problem.
Which is the problem. Yeah,
exactly. There's usually a beginning and an end date. And
so I think, you know, you start by unprocessing your food. I am going to encourage everyone to eat more plants than anything else, but I do like to say that to simplify it, if it was grown or if it was born, you can eat it. And that is if you're unprocessing that, the what, which will decrease the height and the duration of the glucose in your body, and hence the insulin spike to it. So it's super sexy to start with intermittent fasting, but if you're eating like total crap, you know, it's going to be impossible to do effectively or emotionally, because you're going to crash your insulin levels, or crash them up and crash them down much faster if it's
Yeah.
simple processed carbohydrates that we're eating.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, I've had people say that to me is, oh, I like the idea of intermittent fasting because you can eat whatever you want. You just do it in a window. And they think it's like, oh, this like this magic way to lose weight. But
Yeah.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
love the approach.
You're going to feel a lot better if you're eating better unprocessed foods, because you're
Yeah,
not going to have those swings that
exactly.
you're interpreting as low blood glucose or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So I think, again, starting by deciding like what you want to experiment with, like
Mhm.
everyone wants me to like give you the magic bullet of like saying exactly what to do, like a 16
Yeah.
and 8 or 224s. But if it was easy or cookie cutter, like we all wouldn't be here, right? Just like everything, our bodies are super complicated. We're all different. We
Yeah.
can learn the tenets of how it works and why, and then we can learn to experiment with ourselves, give ourselves grace, be your own scientific method, and
Yeah.
decide if you're getting the results you wanted by putting heavy cream in your coffee. Terrific. Like, then don't tweak and try it again. But
Mhm.
if you're not, then make that tweak and try again.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great way to start is finding an 8 hour window in each day in which to eat and to fast another 16. You can try that, and sometimes this not eating first thing in the morning and sort of extending your overnight fast until noon. For some, it's stopping eating at 3 p.m., right? And
Yeah.
then eating all the 2 to 3 meals in that eating window with breaks in between those, and not
Mhm.
eating in the fasting window. You're just going to
Yeah.
have to,
Yeah.
you have to be a planning machine.
Yeah. Exactly.
um, because we all know we don't make good choices in the moment, right?
Yeah.
So like
Exactly.
literally just like calendars, planning, being several days ahead of yourself and asking for help.
Yeah. I love it. I'm sure people are going to ask or be curious about when did you start doing intermittent fasting yourself?
2018.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
when I was studying lifestyle medicine and creating this, doing like thousands of hours of research to
Oh,
create
yeah.
our holist programming,
Yeah.
it was really kind of when I was like, oh, like I was a biochemist. Like this totally makes sense to me. You know,
Okay.
why weren't we ever told this?
Yeah. No, it's so true. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, I'm kind of in a weight maintenance mode myself. And so
Mhm.
I don't do it for any reason other than I feel better, I sleep better,
Yeah.
I think better, and I know that my body is capable of doing the metabolic things that it needs to do for me. And I know that that is going to help with
Yeah.
prevention of, so many things down the
Oh, yeah.
road,
Yeah.
for me, in terms of a health perspective.
Yeah. And like that why, just going back to your comment about the why is so huge too. Like I know right now my mom is diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia.
Yeah.
And that they actually refer to as, have you heard this before? Diabetes type
Yeah.
3. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so again, it's like having a motivation of something like that, like maybe less about weight, but more about just something bigger, like health and being
Yeah.
healthy into your later years.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. What is it? Health span versus lifespan.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
quality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so some things we already talked about the coffee, but there are some things that come up all the time.
Yeah.
So water, you need to be drinking plenty of water. You need to be
Yeah.
drinking at least 64 ounces throughout the day. You can add parsley, cucumber, carrot, lemon, lime, like whatever it is that you want, but just don't add sugared flavorings to it.
Mhm.
One way that I find has been helpful is if you try to drink 8 ounces as soon as you wake up, and
Yeah.
then drink a cup of water right before you eat every time, and you're going to get to that 64 ounces. By cup, I mean 8 ounces.
Yeah.
You're going to get to that 64 ounces
Mhm.
pretty well. And if you're flavoring with, fruit or something like that, it doesn't feel quite as boring.
Exactly. I've got
um,
chlorophyll now, which is
yeah.
actually better than it looks. It's yeah, it's interesting.
So tea and coffee are great options. Just remember that green and black teas have caffeine and herbals don't.
Mhm.
Green tea has been sort of a natural appetite suppressant.
Yeah.
So a small amount of like cream or fat in there is fine, but that's an
Mhm.
option.
Okay.
Um,
What about because I know like people in the health world are going to say is xylitol or stevia okay or like a natural kind of a root sweetener?
yeah, so I have a whole 5 day challenge on learning about sugars.
Mhm.
Those in the natural world, natural healing world, those are recommended. But they, in terms of a hormonal perspective, are so much sweeter that they are going to stimulate your
Mm,
insulin much more than just regular sugar.
okay. Yeah.
I think the only one that I've seen decent information about not doing that is probably monk fruit.
Monk fruit. Okay. So that is the only one that doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's hard to find monk fruit on its own.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Be aware.
I think the way that you think, like what you're doing is, if you're what you're trying to do is get off of processed sugar,
Yeah.
it is going to be much harder to do if you're using a sweeter supplement that is going
Yeah.
to spike your insulin even more. It's gonna kind of do the opposite. And so,
Mm,
as hard as it can be, I think probably cold turkey.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you'll figure out like a week into it that you're feeling so much better that when you
Mhm.
do have like naturally sweet fruits and everything, it just tastes entirely different than
Yeah.
when you were eating
Yeah.
sugars.
Yeah.
Um, we talked about broth a little bit. I think vegetable or bone broth are great substitutes if you're trying to be more plant-based. Then you're not going to want bone broth probably, but the bone does have more nutrients and more fat, so it kind of keeps you more full than the vegetable broths do. And when we're talking about hunger, people assume that they're going to be ravenous, but the truth is that once you, as I like to call like holist adjusted, which is basically fat adapted,
Okay.
your body knowing how to go in and get that energy for you, it's going to happen more efficiently. And those kind of peaks between those metabolic processes are going to get more seamless.
Okay.
And so the waves of hunger are going to come and go more quickly. As you burn more fat stores, you're probably going to even be less hungry.
Mhm.
I think using natural appetite stimulants like water, green tea, cinnamon, chia seeds, those things are
Mhm.
important. But I think also realizing that hunger is often emotional and situational. So if you need to get past that glycogen stage of that 16-hour kind of flip into fat burning, realize that you're going to be fine, that you can ride it out, and that how you're interpreting those sensations may not necessarily be hunger. It's
Yeah.
just a familiar feeling in your body that you're used to feeding with food. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Exactly. Absolutely. And we have someone talking about that topic, Brittany.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then people often ask about exercise as well. So I don't think there's any reason to stop exercising if you're intermittently fasting. Your energy comes from liver gluconeogenesis, so your liver making new glucose. So your body, including muscles,
Mhm.
use this method for energy if you aren't eating. So in fact, I think exercising while fasting is actually a great way to increase your weight loss and to boost your growth hormone. So I think to again, there's a lot of people like I remember when I was training for marathons a long time ago. We like suck on those processed sugar
Oh, those are
packets.
horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like now, because it gives you that feeling, sort of like
Yeah.
caffeine, like gives you that feeling like you have more energy. But
Yeah.
really, what you're doing then is you're just running on pure glucose instead of maybe being more efficient with
Yeah.
making your own and getting
Mhm.
it out of fat could actually probably help with endurance in the long
Yeah.
term even
Yeah, that's
better.
interesting. Yeah. So you've actually there are studies on athletes doing better with fasting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have my personal trainer is a dietitian and a trainer, obviously, and she's one of our holist coaches, and she runs like ultra marathons.
Okay.
And when she first came into Holist and went through our program to become a coach, she changed the way that she was fasting and exercising, and found that she was actually able to run longer with a fasting pattern under her belt,
Hmm.
and improved her ultra times by doing so. So
Cool.
just anecdotally, one of our
That's
coaches has
interesting.
found that as well. Yeah. Um, yeah. I
Yeah.
guess the other thing is like don't expect to be perfect. So you're rewiring your brain to undo like a lifestyle of experiences and emotions and habits and neurochemical connections. And so again, remembering that this isn't willpower, it's skill power. You can't
Yeah.
force your body to do something, but you can be patient, you can do the work, you can ask for help. You know that we make like 700 new neuron connections in our brains per day.
Mhm.
So we have the opportunity to kind of create the change in your brain so that you can eventually do this subconsciously and naturally. I like to
Mhm.
think about like those neural pathways of like your bicep. Like the more you use your bicep muscle, the easier it is to use that without
Yeah.
thinking about it,
Yeah.
which you use the same kind of neural pathways to make decisions, to make habits. Pretty soon you're going to use that path more easily, and the
Yeah.
other pathways that you were using before that were creating inaction or not the results that you wanted are going to slip away. And so just being patient and kind to yourself as
Yeah.
we go.
Yeah, patience. I think that's huge, especially in our world right now, because we always want everything like that. So,
Totally.
but
Yeah.
it does take, yeah, it does take time
Yeah.
and dedication.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So great. Yeah, I think I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people really curious and interested. Um, did you have anything else you want to share before? I'm sure people want to hear about the freebie. Do you want to tell everyone about that?
Yeah, sure. So we have a million, like tons of free trainings and ebooks and all sorts of things here at Holist that I just love to give away, even if you're not going to come in and be like a coaching client of ours. And so one of them that I wanted to give you guys today is a about an hour long training on 7 mindful eating tools to break through weight loss and cravings. And it's not as sciencey as this, but it is like just talking about very specific strategies that you can do to be more thoughtful, more mindful about how it is that you're choosing to fuel your body. And you're going to have a link for that, Linda, right?
Yep, right below. You'll see the
Yeah,
link right underneath. Yeah,
perfect.
awesome.
And we do also have the opportunity to get on the phone with one of our coaches for a free discovery call at any time, to hear about what we're doing, hear if you would be a good fit for what we do here
Okay.
at Holist. And so I will send that link as well.
Amazing. That would be great.
Um,
Yeah, we'll put it below as well. So
Perfect.
that
And
is
then
so
if
great.
you want to, learn more, I have a podcast that's anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Okay.
It's called Curate Your Health.
Okay.
And I do lots of interviews with other people in the health and wellness sphere. And I sort of like to name it like, what's something that you wish you would know before you came to work with me, kind of thing. So like really dialing into the specifics of, what these people do in the health and wellness. And it's super fun. You
Mhm.
can listen to it again anywhere you have podcasts. And then I also have a Facebook group. We're at about 10 or 12,000 people right now. We do free trainings. We post all these, ebooks and trainings there, and really is a place to just support each other. It's a free group, and it's called Curating Your Whole Health,
That's awesome.
with mindset coaching, mental fitness,
Yeah,
as well as physical what, when, and why we're eating.
that's awesome. Oh my God, you're amazing. And I guess if we all start intermittent fasting, we're going to be as productive as you and be able to figure out all that stuff. Um, Thank you so much, Dr. Heather. You are such an inspiration. Keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. We need more people like you who are kind of bringing those two worlds together because it's huge.
Yeah.
So
Thanks so
thank
much.
you. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.